Tom Harker had already paid cash, in full, for the abandoned ranch on the edge of Red Valley. The land was supposed to be his fresh start, his proof that the years hadn't beaten him down. The papers were signed, the deed was clean, and yet, as he stood before the crooked wooden gate that morning, a knot of unease twisted in his gut. The sign on the post had long since faded, but you could still make out the faint outline of the name people whispered about in town, the widow's Acre. Even saying it aloud seemed to chill the air. Tom's friend Dale had warned him about the place, half joking, half serious. No one stayed there longer than a week, Dale had said at the bar 2 nights ago, voice low. Not since the fire. You already paid, Harker, but if you've got sense, you'll let it go. Tom didn't let things go. He was a rancher, through and through. The land called to him. The scent of dust, the stretch of open sky, the feel of a good fence line beneath his palms. It wasn't about superstition or stories. It was about ownership. About building something with his own 2 hands. You already paid. Dale's words echoed in his mind again as Tom lifted the latch on the gate. Just do it. The gate shrieked open, the sound too sharp, like an animal in pain. Dust swirled in lazy spirals as Tom stepped inside. His boots crunched over dry weeds, the soil pale and brittle. He noticed right away that the wind outside the fence seemed alive, but inside, it was dead still. The air hung heavy, as if even the heat was afraid to move. Tom walked the perimeter, his eyes tracing the sagging fence line. Each post leaned at a different angle, like gravestones in a forgotten cemetery. He stopped to test the wire. It snapped in his hand, rust flaking across his skin. He cursed under his breath and wiped his palm on his jeans. Half an hour later, he found himself at the edge of the main structure, the barn. It was bigger than he expected, standing crooked against the horizon. Its roof was torn in places, like claw marks had raked across it. The door hung open just enough to sway, creaking softly, almost rhythmically. Tom hesitated. He wasn't a man given to fear, but there was something about the barn that felt wrong. Not old, not abandoned, but expectant. As if the building itself had been waiting for him. He stepped forward anyway. The hinges groaned as he pushed the door wide. A gust of stale air met him, thick with the scent of rust, rot, and something sweet that didn't belong there, decay pretending to be perfume. Sunlight broke through holes in the roof, casting narrow beams across the interior. Dust floated like ash, catching on the air. Then he saw them. Dozens of cattle bells hung from the rafters by frayed ropes, each one turning slowly on its own axis, as though stirred by unseen hands. They varied in size and color, some polished, some corroded black. Tom frowned, stepping inside. The dirt beneath his boots was uneven, soft in places, as though something had been buried there long ago. He reached up, touched one of the bells gently. It was cold. Then it rang. Just once, a low, hollow note that echoed longer than it should have. Tom froze, eyes darting around. The air had changed. He could feel pressure on his chest, like the barn itself was breathing with him. Another bell rang. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ceiling came alive with sound. Dozens of bells clanging in unison, frantic and chaotic, their echoes colliding like a storm trapped in a box. Enough! He shouted, though his voice was swallowed by the metallic frenzy. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was so deep it felt alive. Tom took a step back, his pulse hammering in his ears. He turned toward the door, ready to leave the barn behind, but that was when he saw it. Footprints. fresh ones. They weren't his. They began at the center of the barn, where the dirt was softest, and trailed toward the exit. The prints were large, barefoot, human, but each step glistened faintly in the sunlight, wet and dark, as though whoever left them had been walking through blood. Tom's mouth went dry. His body screamed to move, to run, but his legs stayed rooted. He followed the prints with his eyes, his heart thudding so hard he thought it might burst. The last print stopped just a few feet behind him. He turned slowly. Nothing. Only the hanging bells, still swaying slightly, as if something unseen had brushed past them moments ago. Then, faint and deliberate, one bell chimed again, softly this time, almost tenderly, like a warning. Tom stumbled backward out of the barn, gasping for air that suddenly tasted like metal. The moment he crossed the threshold, the sound ceased entirely. He looked back once, hand gripping the gatepost, and saw the barn standing silent and still under the pale afternoon sun. But in the narrow strip of shadow beneath the door, he could have sworn he saw movement, something shifting, breathing, waiting. He told himself he'd imagined it. Told himself it was wind and nerves and nothing more. But deep down, Tom knew something had changed the moment that first bell rang. He wasn't alone on the widow's acre anymore. Tom didn't sleep that night. Not really. He dozed for minutes at a time, jerking awake at every whisper of wind or creak of the old floorboards. The farmhouse walls were thin, the windows clouded with years of grime. The silence outside pressed against the glass like something alive, testing its way in. He had locked the doors, checked them twice, even wedged a chair under the front handle. He told himself it was nonsense, just nerves from a long day, but deep inside, he felt watched. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard them again. The faint clang of bells, far off, just at the edge of hearing. At 2:17 a.m., a single bell rang. He sat bolt upright, heart pounding. The sound came again, closer this time. Slow, deliberate, like someone was walking across the yard, ringing the bells one by one. Tom threw off his blanket and grabbed the rifle that leaned beside the bed. The cold steel grounded him, reminded him he was still in control. He wasn't going to let ghost stories scare him off land he'd bought fair and square. He crept to the window and peered out. The yard was drenched in moonlight, pale and colorless. The barn loomed at the far end of the property, its roof jagged against the sky. For a moment, nothing moved, then a flicker of motion. A shape, darker than the dark, slipping between the barn doors. Tom swore under his breath. "You already paid," Dale's voice whispered again in memory. "Just do it." He chambered around, stepped into his boots, and pushed open the door. The night air was sharp, cold enough to bite through his flannel. Each step through the grass made the faintest crunch, too loud in the stillness. The bells were ringing again, softly, rhythmically, as though guiding him. By the time he reached the barn, the sound stopped. The doors stood wide open now, though he was certain he had closed them that afternoon. The interior was black as pitch. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam caught motes of dust spinning lazily in the air, but nothing else. "Anyone here?" he called out, voice echoing against the rafters. Nothing. He took another step inside. The ground felt different tonight. Softer, looser, like it had been disturbed. He swept the beam across the barn, half expecting to see animals or trespassers, but the space was empty. Only the bells hung from the ceiling, motionless. And then, slowly, they began to turn. Not all at once this time. Just one. Then another. The sound of their subtle swaying filled the air like breath. The beam of his flashlight flickered. The barn grew colder. Then came the whisper. Low, dragging, curling around his name. Tom. He spun, light trembling in his hand. Who's there? No answer. But when he turned back, the ground beneath the center of the barn had changed. The dirt bulged upward, as if something beneath was shifting. His light caught the faint outline of shapes buried just beneath the surface, round, smooth, pale. Bones. Tom took a step back. The bells began to ring again, this time in a steady rhythm. Not random. Not chaotic. A pattern. He realized with dread it was spelling something. 3 notes. Pause. 3 notes again. Over and over. You paid. You paid. Then the floor cracked. With a deep groan, the earth split open down the middle, revealing a long trench beneath the barn. The smell hit him first. Old decay, thick and sour. His flashlight slipped, beam darting across the opening. Rows of skeletal remains filled the pit, cattle bones tangled with human ones, all chained together by rusted metal. And every skull, every single one, was branded with the same insignia that marked the deed to his ranch. His brand. He staggered back, bile rising in his throat. No, that's not possible. A whisper drifted up from the pit, overlapping voices like wind through dry grass. You paid. You freed us. The bells screamed all at once, an ear-splitting cacophony that knocked him to his knees. He dropped the rifle. The flashlight spun out of his grasp, its beam landing on something moving in the pit. Hands. Skeletal, gray, and clawed with the remnants of flesh. They clawed through the dirt, grasping the edge of the trench, dragging themselves upward. Tom scrambled to his feet, but the ground was slick, pulling him down. A bony hand clamped around his ankle, cold as ice. He kicked free, gasping, and stumbled toward the open door. Behind him, more hands reached up. Dozens, maybe hundreds, pulling themselves from the earth that had imprisoned them. He burst into the night, sprinting across the yard. Bells clanged in every direction, echoing through the valley like a death knell. The sky seemed darker, the stars snuffed out. At the gate, he turned for one last look. The barn glowed faintly from within, a dull, red light seeping through the cracks. Figures stood in the doorway now, tall, thin silhouettes with eyes like coals, faces blurred by shadow. And then, all at once, the bells fell silent. Tom stumbled backward, choking on fear and dust. The ground beneath him trembled one last time, then stilled. The barn stood quiet and empty again, as though nothing had happened. But when the first light of dawn crept over Red Valley, the gate to the widow's acre swung gently open on its own. Inside, the barn door hung ajar, and from within, faintly, a single bell rang.